his experience working with teams and working with leagues over the years. I just wanted to discuss a little bit about, what we see change-wise will happen or could happen going forward in the next months and even years going forward. So let me show a few pictures first to get us started here. What really got me thinking about this whole notion of what our jobs will be like. I mean, we're all basically in shock, I think, and I think we still are in what has happened to not only our lives, but our careers and sports and all the things that we love. But I think the thing that really got me thinking about this was I had to do a presentation, a Zoom presentation like this for a couple of schools, and I was going updating my slideshow, and I came across a picture that Bob Deutsch sent me from the last Winter Olympics in Korea, and at the time, I literally did not give it much thought. And this is me at the finish line of the short track speed skating in Korea. And truthfully, this is not unusual. I mean, when I got there 3 hours ahead of time and sat in a seat, and then all of a sudden, I've got, people all around me, and we're talking about, we're in regular seats, and they were so close to each other, our shoulders are literally touching. I mean, I have maybe 18 inches or 24, 2 feet separating me from the people below and above me. And so at the time, when I saw this picture, I just laughed, because this is the way it is. And now I look at that picture and I'm shocked. I mean, I'm literally shocked. And this is the seating that you would see. This is from the one of the overhead spots at figure skating, and you can see this is the same kind of seating I had at the finish line of short track speed skating, and you can see how close we are. I mean, we are literally on top of one another. And this is kind of a pano I shot with my phone of one of the photo positions at long track speed skating, and they have separated us out. I mean, they have little lines where that's where you are and your gear is. But look how close we are. I mean, those kind of things I think are really going to change. And we're not talking about just maybe the Olympics, but also and also this is Bob at one of the field level spots. And he's pretty separated from the other photographers. There's only a couple, 3 photographers there, but stuff happens. I mean, at the end of a race, they will jump right at you, and he's literally inches away from these athletes, and that kind of stuff is probably going to have to change. And this is, basically it's like open seating at beach volleyball, and it's just, here's the spot, here's a bunch of benches, and of course half the people aren't even sitting on the benches, they're just sitting where we can, and everybody is literally inches away from one another. And it's not only just at the photo positions. We're talking. This is a bus, a media transport bus, going back to the main press center, and there's no seats left. I mean, you're literally sitting on the floor and standing up, and you're like right on top of one another. So it's not just the photo positions. This is at an NCAA regional. They're knocking knees right here. And the sideline, this is probably from, Jose, is this from the Super Bowl or a playoff game?
That is the AFC Championship game in January. Yeah, this is, and that's just one side. That's not even the corners.
Yeah. And I will have to admit that the NBA or the NFL has done a lot in terms of keeping the sidelines, pretty manageable over the years. I mean, I remember regular season games used to be like this, and now it's not quite like this. But this is from a playoff game. But then, here's a sport that how are you going to be able to separate photographers and keep their social distancing and keep not only the photographers, but the players and the coaches and the medical staff and the cheerleaders. This is a regular season game. Yeah, hey. I don't want to give the coronavirus to the dish guy, who's going to stand in front of me. He's going to stand in front of me. So, this is Wally on the sidelines of just a regular, just a regular Rams game. And, you're, maybe 2 feet apart. You're definitely not that 6 feet. You're definitely not 6 feet apart. And it doesn't, like I said, it doesn't apply just to to shooting. I mean, this is a scrum at a at a presser. And Myung Chun had not been to a Dodger game in like 8 years or something like that. And he goes to the game and he's looking at this spot, and this is just for a regular season, and he's sitting there thinking, this is where I got to shoot from. And this is 6 months ago, 7 months ago. Regular photo position at Dodger Stadium. And of course, like I said, it not only applies just to shooting, but also like where we work. This is just the regular Dodger workroom for editing. That's Kelvin Kuo. And this is the Rams little tent that they have in the end zone. And, we're like on top of one. Rod's got his cameras. Oh, that's my cameras. I was going to say, Rod's got his cameras on top of my computer. This is my camera. Sorry, Rod. I do want to make mention, now that I brought up Rod's name, I did approach several Sports Shooter Academy folks that are team photographers or involved directly with teams, and they would like to have joined, but because they're employed by the teams, they really could not say anything. And as Rod told me, he said, like, I'm an employee of the team. I'm not supposed to talk about it, but you know what? I don't know anything anyway. So there you go. So anyway, I just want to throw it out to our to our panelists, and if you have any kind of observations and in what you think could happen, or especially in your particular all stadiums are different, and photo position different, and sports are different. So like Jose, I think first thing up might be basketball. I mean, right now they're talking about relocating all of the playoff teams to Orlando, Florida, which I think will end up being a situation where, will anybody get to cover it?
To my knowledge, it's going to be really up to the organization that controls it. So it's going to be the NBA, MLB, everyone, NASCAR. And so to my, what I've been reading is that they're going to be the ones that basically set these guidelines, and it's going to trickle down. And a lot of them will be using those guidelines of whoever starts first as their basis to start, and then adjust to that appropriately. And so I'm worried that those first ones are going to be, it's going to be the NBA, and they've already restricted a lot of photographers. So it might just get, of course it's going to get worse, but what do you think, Bert?
Well, in my experience, no offense to the NBA, but the NBA has made, to me at least, in my background, the NBA has made no secret that they would prefer not to have any photographers around except for their own. Yes. And over the past several years, they've used almost every instance or excuse to limit and narrow the number of photographers that they have covering games, and covering games. And you think back to when who was it that got hurt?
LeBron. So I actually was there when LeBron landed on the photographer and sliced his head, and I was shooting from the upper position. And so the unfortunate part was I was actually sending photos because it was near 9:30 when it happened. It was an East Coast game. It was in Cleveland. And I missed the photo, but when I got up to look, he's holding his head, he's bleeding. Now the thing is, he never hit an actual still photographer. He hit an NBA slow motion video camera, which those things, if you've ever seen, are about this big. Yeah. And so when he hit, you'll never see that footage, by the way. That thing is probably like buried somewhere, and but the problem with that is that started this whole situation with the NBA. And then I think probably the next year, I know for sure the next year, that the head of the Warriors PR department came up to me and said, hey, we cleared some spots up above for you, so you guys can shoot up above now. And they're great. You should check them out. And I'm like, no, I'm good. Thanks. So it was already in their mind way back then.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I could go all the way back to the NBA Finals up in Portland, where Michael Jordan, that's came down after shooting a corner, a jumper at the 3-point line on the baseline, and landed on an unnamed AP photographer's 300-2.8 that he had out right on the line, and he turned his ankle. And I was on the opposite side, and I just remember there's like 4 of us looking at each other like in horror, like, well, guys, we might as well pick up our shit now because I think we're going upstairs. and they had to help LeBron. I mean, not LeBron. They had to help Michael off the court, but he came back a few minutes later. So I mean, it wasn't a case of that. He was hurt badly. However, the very next game, we noticed that the line was back about another 6 inches, and they went up and down throughout the game, saying, no gear, on the line. And that's a safety issue, and I certainly understand. I certainly understand that, and support that wholeheartedly. The thing that I have I had problems with was when Paul George got hurt like 3 or 4 years ago, and it was I think it was the USA national team, either a scrimmage or a tryout, where he went driving to the hoop and he injured his knee and then fell onto a photographer, quote unquote a photographer on the baseline, after he had blown out his knee. And, of course, what he actually fell on was a video guy, a league video guy. But, the word went out that, hey, you know what, you guys may not be at baseline anymore. And, a lot of it was pointed to, to that particular incident. The Lakers, I don't know about the Bay Area, but the Lakers have been, right now, and I'll show it a little bit later. Right now, the Lakers basically, other than their photographers and video guys, they're like only 3 or 4 spots on the floor for, non NBA and non-television, video stuff. And most everybody else has to shoot overhead. To funnel this back into, our topic, I think that, whatever the NBA does in Orlando, I could see that basically being probably only pool. I could see that there's probably, and they probably have already done it. They probably already set up a distribution system either through Getty or the AP to distribute their photographers' pictures, because they don't want to have anybody in there covering it, mainly because of safety issues and health issues. But going forward, next 2021 season, looking ahead to that, when things get quote unquote semi back to normal, what will happen? Will everybody be shooting overhead? And then how do we, more to the point, how do we address the health issues? I mean, right now they're talking about that, it's going to be a small bubble of 50 personnel per team that are going to be tested, are going to be housed together, and basically in like a quarantine or bubble situation. So how do you bring in outside press to deal with that? Are we part of the quarantine? Are we going to be tested, or does our publications or the agencies that we work for, they're going to be responsible for, the testing, because I think just like anything else in the world right now, testing. So how does that work? How do we, do the teams test us? Do the leagues test us? Do your publication test you? How does that work? And I think that's going to be one of the big keys is testing, not only for basketball, but everything going forward.
Hey, Bert. I got a little bit of information just from current stuff that's coming up. The Belmont Stakes coming up in 2 weeks, for example. They told us that we needed a certificate of insurance to start, which is, COIs are not uncommon if you bring lighting into a hotel room. To cover a horse race, that's kind of new, and I'm not sure what their point is from the insurance. But then they also sent us a note or put on their website saying we're not taking credential applications at this time. So they're just saying, first, you need a COI for the application, and 2, we're not taking applications. So I'm not sure where they're going with this thing, but it looks like they're going to be limiting their coverage to, now, again, no fans, so it's an empty racetrack. There's plenty of room, but it looks like they're starting that way. NASCAR has told Getty and AP, I believe, plus their own people, they could cover the races. They've told USA Today we can't. And we've gone through lots of yelling and screaming and begging and whatever, and they just said, we're just, no, we're not going to, no. You're not going to, we're just limiting our people, and it's going to be Getty and AP, and that's that. So far, the NFL is going business as usual as far as taking credential requests and how many, but they were further off, and I would expect that to change as we get closer for the reasons that you were showing. How are we going to deal with the press room? How are we going to deal with the sidelines? But at the moment, they're doing business as usual.
Yeah.
And,
Well, the NFL's lucky in that their season, is still, and it's going fast, but their season is still, August. It's a ways away. I think, and also they're outside versus the NBA. The NBA is in a totally, and the NHL in a totally different situation. But the other thing you also have to look at in terms of like, they're going to be playing in basically an empty arena. There's going to be plenty of spots to space out photographers overhead. And I think that's the same also with baseball. And I also think in terms of like football, if some of the things you hear how, the preliminary plans at the NFL are probably bandying about where they're going to limit the capacity to like a quarter, instead of 75,000, it's going to be like 15,000 people, that there's going to be plenty of open spaces. My big thing right now is that, we need to be involved in terms of talking to them on the planning on this, and then do we accept handout pictures from the league? That's another, that's an age old debate. The league covering themselves. Do we accept that as handout?
Hey, Bert, do you have someone in charge of your photo policies and stuff at your organization like we do?
I think we have too many, but
Yeah.
You also have to look at, for us, we've got the paper, USA Today. People don't realize that USA Today, the newspaper, is a separate company than USA Today Sports Images. Though when Bob and I do shoot sports, we're actually, our pictures do go through USA Today Sports Images. So they've got their, they look upon themselves as a wire service like the AP does. So that's why I can see why they're, upset about being excluded, in these instances. I understand why they're doing it, and I am upset that they're using this as an excuse to do something that they've been wanting to do for a while and try to exclude, the number of photographers. I know that I'm sure that we're going to be, a year from now or 2 years from now, you're going to be seeing the number of photographers a lot less, it's just in terms of the sheer number of photographers and the sheer number of agencies or entities they're going to allow to have credentials.
Hey, what has, what's Getty, has Getty said anything? Because Getty's got all these contracts, right? So what's the word, as far as NBA goes and NHL especially and things like that?
I don't think they have said anything to us in a sense until they start having the games off-site from Florida. So we're waiting. Basically, we haven't gotten any credential requests at all. We normally get like, we've already would have had stuff done already for the end, for this next season and
right.
anything. But I mean, I shoot a lot at the racetrack here in Sonoma, and they have not sent me anything as well. And I'm really curious. And I just read a story this morning on that because it was written by a 30-year veteran photographer saying that all these small contract photographers who work for all these, engine parts or spoiler, whoever they do, they're being pushed out by NASCAR. Not and not the track, but NASCAR, and so they're limiting, and then they give a certain amount of credentials to actually to the race car companies, and the race car companies are actually giving those credentials to their family, their friends, and people who famous people or people they knew who vice presidents' kids.
Well, that's been happening for a while on different X Games does that constantly, all that stuff like that, gives them out to everybody. So.
Oh, well, I mean, you see that in the sidelines of every major college game. There's 24 big boosters out there, and same with, I mean, I hadn't covered a high school football game in a long time, and it was shocking to see how many non-football, non-media people were on the sidelines.
Well, especially like De La Salle, Mater Dei.
Yeah,
Bosco,
Mater Dei. I
even
couldn't even walk
Bosco.
back and forth.
Right.
You can't. On Mater Dei, you don't go on Mater Dei's side because it's
No.
just horrible. You stay on the visitor side.
Yeah.
Bosco,
And,
you've
you
been
know,
to
and then-
Bosco, so it's been pretty brutal out there. So.
Right. And by
to
extension,
Vermont.
you know, it's going to be up to these schools and these leagues to monitor that, or at least put down some type of restrictions in terms of not giving credentials or sideline access to, to non
Well, they're-
quote unquote non-essential people.
CIF's put out a note. They're going to probably have sports, no fans. And so I don't know what that's going to do for us yet, but that came out yesterday. I haven't heard about us yet. So
The Northern California, the CIF up here in Northern California, they picked someone else instead. They used to use Max Preps as their sports photographers, and I know
yeah,
they changed, right?
they were supposedly changed last year to, I forgot what it's called now,
Yeah.
but that other place wasn't updating anything, wasn't doing much. They weren't out. So
Nope.
Max Preps was still doing it, but I don't think they're the official photographer of the games yet. Although we didn't go to Sacramento, right, for basketball, so we don't really know.
No,
so,
So yeah, so what's going to happen, I think, is I honestly think they're going to lose the contract anyway because they don't have the database of photographers like Max Pretz has. The problem is that so many people that depend on them for basically that once a week paycheck or something to do. That's it's not your main source of income, but it is your side. It's a liable job. You make that money. And so, and they make a lot of money off reprints. Because I have a friend here who does it every Friday. It comes all the way from Sacramento out here. And he can make easily between $500 a game on just reprints alone. So
Yeah.
it pays off for him.
I think it'll be real interesting to see how it shakes down to, I mean, we're talking about pros all the way down to high school, and it even comes down to event photographers at Pee Wee, little league games and soccer,
Well,
soccer, little kid soccer. I mean,
Right.
These guys, you're going to have to start looking in terms of how they're going to control the sidelines and control the stands at even things like that.
a lot of our guys, the guys that shoot Max Preps, at least the good ones that do a lot, have contracts for local high schools. So that's where they make their bulk of their money, but that's being hurt now. Luis Lopez down here does great job at a couple schools he has, but right now there's nothing going on. I mean, his Max Prep stuff come playoffs and stuff like that do really well because of the reprints, and there's so many schools, but yeah, I don't know how they're going to handle that come fall here if football really, if they don't let them in.
Well,
Because there's going to be some credentials that are not, even MLB and stuff like that. Even if we get in, they're not going to allow a lot of people in. They're going to cut a lot. They cut credentials last year anyway, right? So to some agencies in the last 2 years, they've cut Icon out, at least on the season credential, and a couple other people. So I think it's going to keep happening that way.
Well, to go back to our original thought here, are we prepared to shoot everything at a distance? Are we going to be able to do our job, covering things from overhead? I think I honestly, Bob will attest to this. I'm kind of a pessimist anyway, but.
But I mean, the minute we walk in, right, everything is. Let's say they do let just maybe 2 newspapers in, and maybe 1 extra wire. Oh, this is a perfect example, Bob. Go ahead.
No, I just put this up here just to say that right now, this is from a regular season game this year. It's like about a month before the lockdown, and
Yes, we didn't
like
call in to make a spot that game because we're not there.
Yeah,
That's what we usually do.
Half the games that I cover at Lakers, not necessarily the Clippers, but I'm splitting time with the AP going overhead, overhead, and
Yeah.
this is a picture from Jose, and you're not going to see this kind of stuff anymore. You're not going to, yeah.
So everyone, so the guy on the left is Jeff Chu for Associated Press, and the guy on the right is Ezra Shaw for Getty. And so they actually, for Warriors, we don't switch. We actually, for regular season games, we're there the entire time, and we actually have 5 photo positions on the floor. So we're very lucky, actually. The Warriors take good care of us.
We have to share spots, man. We have to go upstairs 1 quarter, come down 1, go back up 1.
That's crazy.
Hockey's even worse. Hockey, we just, there's like 3 spots basically. So
yeah, and quite honestly, I don't mind the overhead. The one thing that I would like to see more of is whether or not they'll try to mix it up a little bit, because right now at Staples Center we have that one spot in the middle of the be parallel to the center ice. It would be nice if we do end up, being the pessimist that I am, if we do end up only being able to shoot overhead with 400 and 600s, it'd be nice to be able to have something in the end zone and something in mid ice, or at least 2 mid ice, 2 center court positions, and one on each side. So I'm not standing next to the AP, or the AP's not standing next to to Getty. They just want to mix things up. So it'd be nice if this does happen, that we have an option.
Well, it's getting harder to be creative, is what we're saying, right?
Yeah, so that's exactly, really, I mean, anything that's going to be creative has basically been thrown out the window, because no wide, no nothing, no. Well, what I'm saying is, like,
I'm like, nah.
The personal part. I apologize, Hannah.
Yes.
Let me rephrase that. The ability to get close to an athlete to shoot something wide where you would get up to them within 2 feet is gone, right? So that respect,
it's harder. It's definitely harder.
It's going to be harder, but you're not going to be like at the end of the game when the scrum happens and everybody runs out to photograph. That's gone, right?
I don't know. I think personally, I think so, but like I said, I'm kind of a pessimist in this. I want to be optimistic, but my optimism kind of now is kind of trying to work with what is probably going to happen. And like I say, I think it's all going to be overhead, and it would be nice if it's overhead. If it is overhead, we have more than just one single option in that.
Yeah, because one of the things that happens now, I mean, what happened 3 months ago was that photographers were allowed to, with respect, to walk around the court, around football field, and get into places that you could actually, or go into, go next to where the players would basically start warming up. Now the situations are going to be where they're going to have places where you're like, well, no, you can't have that. I don't think they're going to allow any of the warm-up photos. I think they're just going to basically, they're going to come out and say, all right, this is your spot. You can't move the entire game. And you're going to shoot from, hopefully let you shoot from up above. And then, which is basically a 400 or a 7200. And that's about it.
What's up on the screen right now is the basic seating chart for an NC2A regional. And Bob could speak more to this than I can, because he's been to so many he's been to a lot of Final Fours, but it's 2 rows. Unlike most basketball, college and pro basketball games, it's actually 2 rows. And as you can see from the little boxes that they have on the court on that map there, you're very, very, very close. I think that again, just like the other. The other picture from an NBA game, you're and really and truly, that's a lot of room.
Wait, is that guy on the left of Bob wearing a suit? Nice.
Oh, that's Rich Clarkson.
That's not some guy.
That's the living legend. That's Rich Clarkson.
Really? I'd never met him.
Oh yeah.
He's really nice. Yeah, always wears a suit. Jeff Gross behind him.
Yeah,
he and Bob are like next door neighbors for the Final Four for like
that's
the last
awesome.
20 years.
Not anymore.
Yeah, but I mean, I think right there that the picture like this, of photographers sitting that close to one another where their knees are touching, and the photographers behind them, literally like inches away. I think I think those days may be over.
Well, back in
It's most certainly in the next 12 months or the next 10 months that we're going to see a big limitation in that. And there you can see how the boxes are drawn. And quite truthfully, like I said earlier, with that picture from the line at speed skating, you look at that and you go like, oh man, that's a lot of room.
Well, Bert, right back in March, I had a conversation with Porter around Big East. So that was that was before the day or two before the shutdown. And the subject of the conversation is, what are we going to do if the NCAA turns around and says we can't put 28 people on the floor? And he wanted to come up with some kind of a plan to go back to them and say, well, this is how we should do it. Because likely they would turn around and say, well, we'll just let NCAA photos do it. And, they'll handle it and hand it out to everybody. And clearly that isn't something that we were interested in doing, or Porter was interested in doing. So he wanted to have an idea and say, oh, okay, what if? I mean, do we just leave it to Getty, AP, USA Today, Sports Illustrated, whatever, and, 5 agencies that are, their main focus there, and everybody else doesn't show up and we sit 3 seats apart? I mean, that was kind of what they were talking about at the time.
I was thinking about this the other day when you start going through, okay, well, who's in and who's out. And, the first not logical, but the first people they're going to go are going to be things like the student newspaper and the local newspapers. And that's a shame, because the reason why they're there is that they're there to get the pictures that, that the wire services and the agencies aren't going to get, because we're looking at things more globally and they're looking at things more locally. And so all of a sudden, your local coverage becomes, you get this, incomplete local coverage because they're not there to go cover that local team or that local school, and especially for a school newspaper. The other thing is, especially with the NC2A, their mantra, or part of their what they're supposed to be doing is supposed to be teaching. They're school institutions, and how do you reconcile something that's involving schools, not allowing school newspapers to cover it? So I mean, it's a quagmire and a quandary as to how that's going to happen. I think the one thing in the short term is that if there are no fans, and the seats or there's a limited number of fans, there's going to be a lot of open areas, to space out photographers. I mean, not group them together in one box, 10 guys in one box, but, space them out around the arena. But
I don't know if they're going to do that though. I'm kind of, I kind of don't think they're going to do that. Like the Dodgers and stuff. I don't know if they're going to want that.
Yeah. Well, the word that you used is the word that is the important one, is whether or not they want to or not.
Right.
And it's going to be a case of some team, and that's the problem, is that unless the league comes down and says that these are the guidelines that we want to see, how you handle the media and how you handle photographers, it's going to be really inconsistent. Especially if they go through with this plan where they're actually going to be playing home games in their home stadiums. So it's going to be up to each team to determine that, and you're going to have this uneven situation. You're going to have these uneven rules as to how the photographers are going to be managed, and how the writers. I mean, think about the writers themselves. That locker room access is gone for them. I mean, I don't ever see a horde of media going into locker rooms ever again.
It's hard to get it back.
They'll do what they do for
gone.
the playoffs, and there'll be a designated pool guy, and that's it.
So, Bert, there was one of the questions was about PPEs and how we get them, and how do you think how are we going to be using them on the field? And I know my PPEs I get through work, and they're very limited, and so I have to be careful on how I use them, especially when I'm in areas where it gets saturated a lot, like a protest or something. So I'm sure I'll keep one just for sports and one for protests or something. But have you had given any thought to that stuff?
Well, in terms of how we're going to use them to cover,
yeah, because I think all this is going to. I mean, oh, by the way, just before I forget, the Oakland A's had laid off Debbie Dallas, who basically was our the person that supported us the most to the media. She's gone. So now any decisions or anything that's gone through the Oakland A's comes from up above, which means
They can't pay their rent. What are you talking about?
yeah, we can't even pay our minor league baseball team guys. So now, so that is even going to fall upon even more on the, they're just going to listen to whatever MLB says because they don't have the people or the staff to actually make these decisions. I mean, I hope the Dodgers do have that. It's totally different, right? Or no?
Well, the one thing about baseball, each stadium is different, and each stadium has different photo positions, and so like this one right here, this is basically supposedly a two-man pit for photographers, and it's really enough room for one guy. Again, I think it goes back to whether or not they're going to allow field level photographers. I think what's going to happen is it's going to be from the stands or it's going to be from overhead. And
Dodgers are
each stadium presents its own its own different challenges. Like Dodger Stadium. I mean, shooting overhead or from a seat in Dodger Stadium is going to be almost impossible because they put a netting all the way around the stadium now. So you would have to shoot through a net, kind of like this, except probably worse.
A lot worse.
Yeah.
At a distance, so it's a lot worse.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Hey.
Hey.
I know that guy.
Well, remember, it wasn't that long ago. The Dodgers tried to make us pay to come out to shoot. Basically, remember? So
yeah.
I mean, you never know what comes out of a couple of people there that want us to do. So it's
that was a decision made by not made in basic isolation. It wasn't a team photographer or media relations guy that was that deals with the press every day that's making those decisions.
No.
I think that baseball, if they have, I was thinking about this last night that, I think baseball is maybe right now less than a 50-50 proposition. I think that the players are mad enough that they would rather just not get paid than get.
Well, they don't want to take a pay cut.
I think that there's enough of them mad enough to sit there and be able to just say that we're not going to vote for anything, but I'd hate to see, that's definitely something totally out of our hands. But, again, this is baseball in Asia, no fans. I mean, this is what it's going to look like. And you could see it, and you could see on the left above the dugout, you can see 2 or 3 photographers right there, and then a couple of TV guys. And the still photographers on the left, they're not even socially, they're sitting right next to each other.
See, that was the thing I was wondering, because they might say, well, listen, if you want to get a shot of second base, we're going to have to figure something else there.
And I think, and they're shooting through the net too.
Yeah.
This where you have cardboard cutouts filling the stands. I really got into this Korean baseball, the KBO. I kind of watch it a little bit every night, and it's kind of fun. I'm a huge baseball guy, and I certainly miss watching MLB. But watching these Korean baseball KBO games is pretty pretty fun. But this could be what we might be looking at over the next 6 months.
If on football, for example, if they put three seats between each fan, that doesn't mean that the rest is open for us, because we're not going to be able to sit between 2 people and make it less than those 3 empty seats. That's not going to be safe for them or us. So
no, and it's going to be a case where they're going to have to set aside, a row where 2 or 3 photographers, can space out and be. It's just, again, back to what Keith says. It's just whether or not they want to do that.
I can't see them taking away paid seats when they've only got 15,000 people in the stadium, and then they're going to take out, another 100 or 50 seats for the media. I don't see them doing that.
Yeah, well, again, I think it's going to be a case where, you're going to see somebody was bandying about on our message board that, that's going to have a 50%, less credentials. And honestly, I could see it being a lot less than that. I could see it being like 30% or 33%.
Yeah, I agree.
Great.
Now, my question will be is where we're going to send our photos from, because I'm thinking we're all going to be sending where we're sitting from now on.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Right, Hannah?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I was just talking to one of the Star Tribune guys on Monday before my city started burning. And he was saying, we're gonna walk in and we're gonna have our spots, and hopefully with the size of the stadium, they allow for some roaming, but like I know that the communications department at the Twins, they think that their team photographer does the same thing as the Star Tribune, does the same thing as the AP and Getty. And because we have cameras, so we're all the same person. We're all doing the same thing, and we're doing very different things.
Yeah.
And I think that that's part of the informational thing. But we were saying that, we kind of roll in with a rolling bag. I'm wondering, are we going to have the access even to put up a remote camera anywhere in the stadium? Because it might be that you have to clear it before. Is it going to be a pool situation where there's 1 to 2 photographers per game, and they're just the pool for that game? And then, and for me as a freelancer, the idea being a pool, does that mean I stop collecting my unemployment to go back to do 1 game a week?
Oh, no way.
Yeah.
Well, I think so on that, I think if the Dodgers, if they say, okay, if they actually say we can sit in the stands, then they're going to not allow us on the field at all. They won't let us on the field. They'll block that because there won't be a need. And our spots like there are right at the dugout, and even at Angels, there's going to be, they'll just have us in the stands.
Yeah.
Why would they have us take that risk?
With me last year with baseball, I was going up to the 300 level and doing a home plate remote, straight down as I can. Yeah. Am I allowed to go up to the 300 level to set that remote?
I think
I
think the remotes are going to be more valuable than ever. The question is, if you have to set one up where everyone wants to set one up, you're going to have to get there even sooner. You have to set up a time frame because you just can't be hanging around together, right? And so I think the remotes are going to be even more important, especially for baseball and basketball at that respect.
But we can't you're not going to put a remote high at Dodger Stadium. You're netted in everywhere. Yeah. Unless it's just not going to work.
Oh, really? Wow.
You're not going to, there's no remotes. And at Dodger Stadium, you got to get, and they're doing this the best. You have to have permission before you go anywhere any longer up high, roam around. Mm-hmm. But there's no place you can't do a remote. It's hard. You can't do it in the basket. It just doesn't look that good. Unless you've got a long glass trying to go through the net, and you got to go high because then you're right on the top wire eye line if you're where you used to be. So, it's going to be problematic. I don't think that's going to work well.
So you're still seeing the netting when you're all the way up in the upper deck?
Oh, yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
It's that tall?
Yeah, you'd have to go to the top to get over. Even in the basket at Dodgers, you're still getting it. So if you go down far.
And the thing is that the distance to the net with like a 400 and a 600, all it does is just make that netting worse. It's horrible. I remember going around with a 400, walking around the stadium just to see what the overhead spots. And to tell you the truth, the only clean spot on the ground level was outfield. And now with the new remodeled Dodger Stadium, they don't even have the outfield spots.
Yeah. Well, and so for us, our netting took away our main concourse as a shooting spot. That's basically all it took away, because there's a walkway sort of similar to this Korean baseball stadium, there's kind of a walkway that's maybe 10 rows up, 12 rows up that you're able to shoot from, and then you're close enough to the netting that you're able to shoot through it.
Yeah.
So I'm curious to see if our organizations will say like, well, now each newspaper, like each wire, will get, like you said, a certain day where you're going to get to go, but you're not going to get to go. And who do we request it from? Well, they'll probably designate somebody, but it's going to be kind of like who gets priority now.
Yeah.
If we even have access to that.
And you're going to be tested, right? You're going to walk in, you're going to get probably temperature tested, you've been tested. I mean, I've had that already in a few places I've gone for different assignments here. They'll take my temperature.
Did they put an ear tag on you? Okay.
No, just a sticker. But that's what they're doing. So I'm sure they'll do that there. That's what Disneyland's going to do, right? They're doing that and they're going to do that in Florida. So I'm sure they'll do that here.
Yeah, it's going to be like some countries that actually require you to carry a health card with you, just like a driver, like an ID, and it'll have like when you were last tested and that type of thing. I mean, again, that fatalistic tendency of mine and all of the bad, dystopian science fiction movies I watch where Big Brother's going to be out in full force. Back to something Bob said earlier, it got me thinking about freelancers and the whole thing where, are things like liability insurance or a new type of liability insurance going to be, required to cover these? I mean, if you work for, if you're on staff at a newspaper or a wire service or an agency, that's going to be covered. But, there's, honestly, there's more freelancers covering sports than staff guys these days. And how are those type of costs and how are those types of limitations going to affect their business? Because, if I have to get tested to go do an assignment, my company's going to cover that. Now, is that going to be the case with, maybe the bigger agencies like AP and Getty that use a lot of freelancers, that they're going to go ahead and pay for the contract guys and the freelance guys? But these smaller agencies or freelancers who do a lot of spec work, are you going to be able to absorb those type of costs of having to have liability insurance for every that you go into to go shoot, and as well as getting tested and having proof of being tested?
That's a really good point too, because you just brought up about freelancers, because Associated Press out here uses, I'd say probably almost 60% is freelanced out because of that. And so, that's one of those liability issues. Like I know one of the local newspapers, I'm not going to say who, but it wasn't us. They freelance a lot of their fire coverage. They freelance a lot of their fire coverage, and one of their contract photographers fell down and dislocated his shoulder. So now he has to pay out of contract for his own health benefits. This is going to open new doors for everybody. I mean, is AP going to cover that? Is Getty?
What are you liable for? I mean, if you carry a certificate of liability for COVID, what are you liable for? Getting somebody sick? How would you possibly, if you could be symptom-free but contagious for a week, how do you get insurance that says I won't get somebody sick, and then who pays for that? None of that makes any sense to me.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there was that bill in Congress about protecting businesses from liability for that type of thing. And I think what hung it up or is going to hang it up is like, well, how do you prove that this clerk or that food handler got everybody sick?
Exactly.
Well, talk about food. Our media room food is gone now, guys.
That could be a good thing. Yeah, Jose, that could be a good thing or bad thing.
San Francisco for the 49ers for the food room there, right?
Hey, that's probably one of the best things we have. That's the only thing we had.
Yeah.
At the Oakland Raiders, you can't figure out if it's fish or chicken. It's horrible. Niners was the only place you actually had a decent meal.
That was good. Yeah.
Good
stuff.
Yeah. But that's
well. All I can say is, whatever happens, I hope it doesn't bleed into next season if they go back to being normal, because I think some of this stuff is gonna, if it's too heavy, it's gonna bleed into next year and really hurt us. I mean, I don't know.
There's a story in today's Washington Post or New York Times, I forgot which, which the basic gist of was that this isn't going away this year. There isn't going to be a next year. That we're looking at 10 years, even with a vaccine or anything, that it's dumb to pretend that that it's going back to normal. It's not going to exist either any 10 years or maybe forever, but certainly not next season, that all of a sudden we're going to go back to hanging around each other and doing all this stuff. It's not going to happen.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah,
yes,
you're right.
it's a depressing way of looking at it, but that's really the truth, that this, it's vaccine or no vaccine, this is not going away.
Yeah, I mean,
Well, on that note,
Sorry.
that was depressing.
Yeah.
no. I what I wanted to do is
Positivity.
our people that dialed in. If you have any questions you'd like to throw out there, and this is, like I said, we have no real insight into this. This is just our workshop faculty kind of ruminating about how things could be and how things we would like it to be, and then also to try to be a little, except for me, to be a little optimistic about this. But if you have any questions, go ahead and unmute yourself and go ahead and toss on click on your video. And if you have any questions or any comments, we'd love to hear hear it.
I've got a question, and I think it might help with the doom and gloom tone that we've got going on. But
Hey.
Thanks, Bob.
So I think Keith's point that it's a slippery slope. Like, it's not going to get rolled back, these restrictions that are going to be put on. How are we able to communicate with the leagues? Like, can we get MLB photos, NBA entertainment, NHL images, those people in the league offices to advocate for us? Because I do think that with not having fans in the seats, we've got a lot to offer. Like, they get more diverse coverage. That's beneficial for them. And how can we communicate that that's something we can offer? And also, with very vague MLB related things, do you think that sitting in the front row of the seats at an MLB stadium, is that going to negate the effects of the net when you're right against it? It's just like shooting in that well at that stadium you mentioned. And maybe people could sit behind home plates or go on the roof or something like that. Just to those are some positive things.
Well, the netting is not going to help whether you're not right up against the net when you're sitting in the front row. So that's not going to help you much, right? And
Yeah,
as far as it's not going to help you that much there. It's okay, but it's not going to help you. But we do have some advocates for us. Jessica tries. We don't have a unionized group where we have one or two people going to each, MLB or NFL or anybody just really fighting for us, and that they listen to us. It would be nice.
So Keith, you're saying even if you're, say, 6 feet away from the netting, that's still going to cause an issue for you to shoot through it?
It does at Dodgers. It's not that great. Yeah.
It's because I'm 20 yards away from it, and I'm shooting through, and I'm getting fine.
Yeah, but you shoot cannon. I'm kidding.
No, no, I don't.
Oh,
No!
God. Somebody had to utter the C word.
Even
No C word.
I think you're going to be much closer than 6 feet if you're sitting front row. And also, for instance, there's a certain stairwell that if you're standing, 12 feet away, you can shoot at least a 135 and not get any
Lens blur or anything.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think each stadium's different. Oakland A's is different than Pac-Bell Park, or where you call it now. So depending on each stadium is going to have to be, you'll have to have that conversation with the PR department where they put you and making photo positions. I think that's what's going to be really important, the conversations that you're going to have with each individual team, where you're going to be. Now, will they allow you to walk around after and go a little higher or lower? That is going to be a really good question. But once they situate in those spots, I honestly believe that they're just going to say, for liability issues, you are stuck here and you can't move anywhere.
Right.
I mean, I think it's, I like to think of it in turn, like Josh is that, you know, I think that this could be a good opportunity because, you know, we're gonna have to make the best of not an ideal situation. I mean, Hannah mentioned it as well, that, you know, this could be a good, you know, this could be something good in terms of creativity. The one thing is that, you know, our leaders of our respective departments or whoever we work for have to start talking to individual teams and the leagues themselves to see that we at least are given some thought into this. I mean, if anything, you know, this whole hour that we've gone through, I think that's probably the biggest and most important thing, is that to be proactive in this, is that, you know, I mean, you don't want to bug them, but you also want to make sure that they keep us in mind. You know, I mean, obviously we're pretty low on the totem pole because health is the number one thing. But I also think that we need to make sure that they understand that our jobs that we do normally is a great opportunity for them. I mean, and you know, we normally report what goes on, but this is a case of that this is very important to a lot of people, you know, restarting sports. And I think that the coverage that local newspapers and different organizations will give versus what the team photographers or the league photographers will give is, you know, a lot more.
Because one of those things, oh, sorry, Hannah, go ahead.
Oh, I was just wondering if anybody knows a little bit more about Bundesliga in Germany and how they're dealing with media, and if the media has to quarantine. Like, I know all the teams are quarantining, and I'm wondering if the media is also having to quarantine to cover them.
Yeah, I tried to look that up actually, and I didn't see anything. I did go on.
Yeah.
I did go on to the wire service to see, you know, if they're getting coverage, and they're actually getting a lot of coverage. So you know, they're actually, it's not, you know, looking at the bylines, they're not just being limited to just the league or team photographers, but how logistically they're doing it. I'm you know, I don't know. I know they're being pretty strict because they had one coach that broke the quarantine and went out to go get a tube of toothpaste, and he ended up throwing him on another quarantine for like, you know, for 2 weeks to go get a tube of toothpaste.
I'm just kind of wondering about that because as a potential host city for the NHL, like, just wondering what that is. Am I going to have to go move from my house into a hotel that's part of this quarantine to cover that playoff situation if it happens?
Yeah, I you know, it's going to be real interesting because
I don't know if that's going to happen in baseball because the players they don't want that.
Yeah,
they don't want to be quarantined.
I understand that.
Baseball.
I understand that's not happening at baseball. I'm just saying the NHL, that is what's happening.
Yeah.
And for their playoff scenario.
Well,
and
let's look a year from now. What's going to happen with the Olympics?
Yeah. Well, so we have a question about that. You know, any thoughts on the Olympics? And you know, it's interesting at the point where they canceled the Olympics, you know, credentials had already been issued. I mean, not issued, but actually, you know, been approved. So they knew who was coming and who was going to get credentials. And I haven't heard whether or not they're going through a re-credentialing process. I don't think they are.
I haven't got anything. I haven't received anything.
And so, you know, looking at the pictures that I showed at the top of this presentation, you know, under the current situation, they're not going to be able to support that many photographers. And I mean, not only at social distancing at events themselves, but also in the workrooms as well. I mean, you know, the workrooms are usually pretty spacious in terms of, like, you know, a lot of table space. But if you're going to have to basically keep 6-8 feet away from each other, you're talking about having to, you know, divide that space now into like a quarter or a third. And, you know, there's going to be a ton of photographers out there. What's that, Jose?
How are you going to be transported from one spot to the other?
Well, like I said, that picture I showed of the bus, after a big event, that's what it is. You are stacked one on top of another. And then you know, same with the media, you know, the workroom themselves. You know, everybody's got a seat, but you know, you're, you know, a few inches away from the guy next to you. So I don't know how the Olympic Committee is going to be able to handle that. Like I said, they've already allocated credentials, so they're going to go back and say, okay, AP, you only get half of what your allocation is. Okay, USA Today, you're only going to get a quarter of what you asked for. Are they going to be able to go back and say that? And the other thing is financially, all of us have already paid for our hotel rooms, already paid for our flights, even though we've had to rebook them. Yeah. So now you're talking about, financial constraints and financial liabilities as well.
Well, look for us. Oh, we only send one guy, and that's Keith. So.
Well, I want to go back to something Keith said about the fact that we don't have a lot of clout as photographers, but I think I've never felt the photo community be stronger than it is right now. And there's squeaky wheel gets the grease, and there's no reason we can't use this time that we're all sitting talking to each other on Zoom to organize and strengthen our collective voice, I guess is my point.
That's a good point. The ability to have open conversations. The only problem is our people over here, they're laying off and Oakland A is just basically laid off or furloughed half of their staff. So, the Giants are being pretty quiet about it. 49ers are being very quiet about it, but we're reaching out at this point right now and waiting for them to respond back to see how we're going to handle that.
Well, I'm all for having a voice against, to fight for us to do this. And we may be going up against a brick wall, but it's good to have. I'm all for that. Oh
yeah, you got to at least let the teams in the league know what our
You're right.
our requirements are. Obviously we have to be flexible and understand that things aren't going to be the way they were, and they probably never will be. But we also have to let them know that we still have a job to do, and and the other thing is how accepting we're going to be if all of a sudden they say, okay, well, we're just going to give you NBA photos. That's going to be your coverage. Are you going to accept that? Or more precisely, are your bosses going to accept that? And is your sports department going to accept that? Are your news editors going to accept that? Handout pictures are always a slippery slope.
I know for me, I'm very lucky to have the Star Tribune as my local paper. It's just one of those things where I know trying to ignore you for so much taking photos. But I
give
know
it to me,
that,
baby. There you go.
But I know that we've had incidents in the past where they have stood their ground for their photographers, but they do it in a way where they say, if this happens to any photographer at the stadium, we will pull coverage.
See, that's unusual, I think.
And I absolutely love that about their photo staff.
Oh, that's fantastic.
They have the back of all of us. And
isn't that one of our papers, Star Tribune? Is it?
Yeah, Glenn Taylor, the Timberwolves. Pioneer Press is the one.
Pioneer Press is the one. Never
mind.
Yeah,
no.
They probably don't help that.
They don't have a photographer there.
They have an iPhone, Hannah. It's an iPhone.
It's
all you need.
If Jose could show up, I'd appreciate it.
I would fly out there to do that.
Pinata.
So one of the things, I would go my pinata. So one of the things we talked about was, okay, what happens if somebody gets hurt or gets in a fight, and Getty Images is the only person there taking pictures? Do you really think that Getty Images is going to file that photo? They'll file it, but will it get past their desk to everybody else?
Tough to say, right? You don't know.
Well, traditionally, that's been the problem with handout photos, particularly in the NBA, is that, many years ago, they said, we're just going to not let you guys come. We're going to hand you the pictures. And that was the first question we had is, well, what happens if they have a fight in the stands and the player goes in there, which had just happened?
Yeah.
And would you give us the pictures? And they were like, no. So we throw a shit fit, and it didn't happen. But now things are entirely different. And don't forget, not every organization is all that keen on helping everybody else. Like, it may not be in Getty's best interest to want all the photographers there. They may turn around and say, you know what, Getty's the only photographer there. That's okay with us. Because traditionally, that's exactly what they've done. No offense,
yeah.
I'm a freelancer. I don't represent my clients.
it's like NASCAR. You know, if AP and Getty are in there, they're happy with that. They're happy that they're in, and they're happy that nobody else is. So are they going to turn around and tell the NASCAR that, I'm sorry, we have to let USA Today or the New York Times or anybody else in? No, they're like, no, we're good.
Well, someone brought up a really good point, and I think that what's going to hurt this is overall in photojournalism be the students, because we're talking, you know, years from now, kids that are starting out are just getting into this right now, and all of a sudden, how do you do what we do with all these limitations, and how many kids are going to be, especially at these college levels, are going to be, you know, prevented from covering something and doing and learning the craft that we do. That's one of my biggest worries is how are we going to help them advance in that?
Yeah, I had a conversation last night with a college student, and she told me that the school that her school newspaper's already been told that they're not going to be allowed to cover games, flat out. You know,
Wow.
we're not going to credential anybody except for, you know, whoever it is they're going to credential, and that's not including, you know, including the student newspaper. And like I said earlier when I was talking about the NC2A. You know, this is an educational institution. I mean, they should be taking care of the students. You know, that should be a high priority. And you know, before they've even had their first football practice, already telling the student newspaper that don't expect to get credentialed for the upcoming football season.
Yeah. Because I mean, out here we have San Jose State, San Francisco State, and you know, it's
Stanford, Cal,
St. Mary's, you know,
Cal State Hayward.
Cal State Hayward, woo, East Bay.
Hey, is it Cal State Hayward or is it Cal State East Bay now? What is it now?
It's Cal State East Bay.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. When I went to school, it was Hayward State. So
yeah,
tells you how old I am. Anyway, we've gone quite a bit longer than I thought. But if there are any last questions or comments from anybody, go ahead and unmute yourself and you know, activate your video your web camera if you have any questions or comments. I'm sure there's got to be some other comments out there. Brian, I cover the AT&T. Oh, that's you.
Yeah, I practically die every time I cover the AT&T because it's 3 golf courses and it takes you 20 minutes to get between each one. And if you're the only photographer covering it, oh geez, brutal.
Yeah, I remember I used to cover that a million years ago, and that was always one of those good news, bad news things. Like, hey, I'm in Monterey. Holy crap, I got to cover this golf tournament, and in the rain. I covered it like 5 or 6 years, and I think every year it rained at least one day. Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah. Anyway, last call for any questions or comments, and I want to thank everybody for turning out. I also want to announce that our next session is going to be a week from Friday, and I haven't started promoting it yet, but I'll just tell all of you that are on this meeting right now, and we're going to have our very first Sports Shooter Academy alum show and tell. And it's going to involve our 3 sports shooter alums that have gone to work for the LA Dodgers, and that would be Josh and Katie and who am I missing? Who's the third? Carrie. And they will be talking a week from Friday about the work that they do with the Dodgers and how they got the job and how they treat me and Keith at games every week and all of that. So again, that's going to be a week from. We haven't gotten a time yet, but it'll be a week from Friday. And I also want to throw it out to after this one that I think a lot of you guys should take advantage of this. It's really going to be a good opportunity for you guys to show some work and talk about what you do. And you know, it doesn't have to be an hour. It could be 20 minutes, it could be 30 minutes, but this Sports Shooter Academy alum show and tell, I think it could be a really, really cool thing. So a week from Friday, it'll be Dodger Vision with Carrie, Josh, and Katie. And again, thank you guys again for joining us. I know we kind of rambled on, but it was a good conversation. And I also think that it's kind of prompted me to maybe talk to my bosses and also send off a note to the NPPA about seeing what they're doing on our behalf. And again, thank you guys again for tuning in.
Thank you guys. Appreciate it.
Hey, Keith,
Thanks,
send me a
Keith.
Dodger dog. I'll eat it while we watch next week.
A Dodger dog
Thanks,
pinata.
Keith.
I'll talk to Libby.
Thanks, Keith. Thanks, Hannah. Thanks, Bob, for filling in.
Bye, Hannah.
Yep. And
Hello.
yep, we'll talk to you guys.
Bob.
We'll talk to you later. And then Hannah, I'm going to shoot you an email about something else we want to have another
Yeah.
panel about.
Yep, I think I just got a Facebook message about it before you got to me, but
Oh, okay. Somebody talked about it to you about it before I got a chance to even ask you about it.
So, and then also, I know I've reviewed some students' portfolios, but feel free to shoot me a message on Facebook or email, info@foslien.com. And I am willing to sit down and do portfolio reviews. And then also I'll be working on doing a hopefully series of about the process of putting together a portfolio.
Ooh.
Yeah. And let me know too. I can help out and I can sit behind Hannah.
Really? I can show you my book, man. I can show you my
Yeah.
oh.
I mean,
That's
you just went
awesome.
through your archive, and I can give you some feedback.
You know,
Jose,
there's that age-old saying that a photographer is his own worst editor. And I tell you what, at one point, I showed my portfolio to an unnamed photographer, and it was about 125 pictures, and he told me I needed to cut it down by 124. So there you go. Anyway, again, thank you all again. Thanks, Jose, Bob, Hannah.
Bye, guys.
And Keith took off. He's pouring cement. So, and again, thanks again. Thanks a lot, guys.
Bye-bye.
Yeah. Bye.